He was an incredible lawyer. He's the most brilliant guy I ever met, but he was limited. I tried. I could have tried harder.
Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'm going to talk about the ending of Better Call Saul. And this video will absolutely contain spoilers for the end of the Breaking Bad universe if you haven't watched the finale yet. I imagine at some point there was a meeting where Peter Gould explained a vital piece of information to his costume director. I'm going to need you to find a suit that goes so hard that it drips Saul Goodman even when we see it in black and white. After all, this is a man getting dressed for his own funeral. Saul Gone is the rare TV series finale where I got everything that I wanted and then some. It managed to give me more than what I was willing to expect for fear of being disappointed. I may not have necessarily been hoping to see Gene turn so hard into being Saul, but what I thought was brilliant in the way this was put together was that the writers led me on a journey where, because of what I know about the characters, I could more or less anticipate each step, and it all felt right. Once again, they managed to make it exciting, even though ultimately the characters do what we expect them to do. And to be fair, it's a lot more cerebral than what I imagine some people were wanting. So I guess I could see how it might not land for some, but I'll come back around to my thoughts about why it worked after I recapped what happened. Spoiler alert, because Jimmy didn't get away with it and still found redemption from the only person that matters to him. Episode 13 opens with the first of 3 flashbacks, which in his interview with Alan Sepinwall, Peter Gould compared to A Christmas Carol. In the episode, we watch Gene become Saul, and he's visited by 3 ghosts. The first is Mike Ehrmantraut, which happens during their trek through the desert back in episode 508, Bagman. I guess if we really wanted to put this in context for the timeline, since he still has his urine in the Davison Maine bottle when he finally gets phone service, this would have to be after they make contact and no help is on the way. Jimmy brings up the idea of keeping the $7 million, and when Mike explains why that would be a bad idea, he lays out his plan. Take the first $6 million and build a time machine. That leads to the question of where's the first place you'd go. Mike says back to December 8th, 2001, which I presume is the night he killed his son Maddie's murderers based on the timing of things. But he quickly updates that to the first day he took a bribe and became a crooked cop. What's more important than his answer is that he's being honest, which Jimmy shows is something he's incapable of when he talks about going back to invest the rest of his money. This is before Howard died and before Kim left him, and so before he ever decided to go full Saul to try to relieve his pain. So we know his answer is BS. This lack of honesty will continue through the second flashback where we go back to Ed the Disappear's basement during the events of the penultimate episode of Breaking Bad. Before Saul was carried off to become Gene in Omaha and Walt was stashed away in New Hampshire, they spent some time together and Saul brought up the time machine question again. Walt, being the arrogant prick he is, dismisses it as a meaningless question because that kind of time travel is impossible, as it would violate the second law of thermodynamics. This takes us a step closer to what the whole thing is about when Walt calls it what it is. Saul is asking him about his regrets. Mr. White almost gets there when he mentions gray matter, but quickly shifts the blame away from himself by saying that his partners were artfully maneuvering him into making his decision. Saul still can't come up with anything real, so he brings up a slip and fall that still gives him pain, and to that Walt says, "So you were always like this." This sounds a lot like the third ghost, his brother Chuck, and is something that would later be echoed by Howard Hamlin right before he died. And I do think this is crucial to what they're trying to say with this story, so I will definitely come back to it at the end. Before we get into that, this finale is about change, and before that can happen, Jimmy/Saul/Gene has to make a choice. To get us there, the present-day timeline picks up right where episode 12 left off. We saw a glimpse of Jimmy when he didn't stop Marion from pushing the button on her life alert, but now he's fully Gene in survival mode trying to escape. On his way out, in her last dramatic contribution, Marion is able to get his license plate number, which means it doesn't take the police long to track him down. There's a short chase where it seems like he might have a chance to get away. I mean, he still has those diamonds and Ed's number, right? Yes, but no. His escape ends in a dumpster, which is a nice reference to the beginning of the Sandpiper case back in season 1. In case you weren't sure where his head was, it can be kind of confusing. His first call is to Cinnabon to tell them they'll be needing a new manager. After that, he sort of falls apart in the holding cell, and at his lowest point looks up to see, "My lawyer will ream you" as carved on the wall. He starts to laugh, and in this instant becomes Saul Goodman. In the script for the episode, Peter Gould wrote that as a fugitive, he was playing a game he didn't know. But now that he's in the system, his system, he's like Kal-El waking up under a yellow sun. In this place, he has superpowers. And we see him get right down to the business of putting those to use. He calls Bill Oakley, who Francesca told him had switched sides to become a defense lawyer, and he sets out to get himself a deal. On the way to meet with the lawyers, he sees Marie Schrader and uses her as a prop to show them what they're up against. After listening to a heartfelt monologue about losing her husband and what she'd like to see happen to Saul, he responds in kind with a story about how he got dragged into working with Walter White. He mentions being taken to the desert and having a gun pointed at his head, and how that scared him into doing everything he did. It's the kind of performance we've seen before, and he basically looks sincere. No one in the room believes this to be true, and the prosecutor doesn't think a jury will either, but that's not what's important. As Saul points out, all he needs is one, and that reality is enough to bring them to the table. He gets them to agree to a really generous deal where he'll serve 7 years at the prison of his choice. It's Saul at full throttle, and while 7 years is not nothing, this would pretty much go down as a legendary win given the circumstances. It almost ends there, but when he pushes for a pint of Bluebell mint chocolate chip ice cream in exchange for information about Howard Hamlin's death, he learns about Kim going back to Albuquerque to file her affidavit with the DA. While that steals his thunder as far as the mint chocolate chip is concerned, it gets worse when Bill tells him on the flight back that even though there are no witnesses, and the DA probably won't do anything with it, she also went to confess to Cheryl in person, which means she'll be able to bring a civil suit against her. We see that this gives Saul an idea, but it's not at all clear what his angle is. He tells Bill to tell the prosecution that he has more information about Howard. This is somewhat confusing because, as Bill points out, anything he tells them might be bad for Kim. Plus, we know that Kim isn't looking for him to save her. But at this point, we have to sort of give it to him that he knows better than us. After the end of the last episode, I was hoping that Kim's breakdown on her way out of Albuquerque would mark the end of the indecisive life she was leading in Florida. We take a brief trip there to see that it is starting to happen, but that it's going slow. It's not Jimmy turning into Saul or Kim waking up in the morning and snapping back to be her old self. In a scene at lunch with her co-workers at Palm Coast, she still struggles to offer an opinion. But later, we see her go to the local legal aid office and volunteer. It's a step in the right direction, and I loved how the woman is so busy that she doesn't offer much in the way of her having to make a decision. She just tells her to answer the phone, and we see how she lights up and rises to the challenge right away. Unfortunately, any newfound peace she achieved from this is dashed away when she gets a call from ADA Erickson. She tells her that Saul's in custody and that he's giving testimony that affects her personally. Cut to Saul Goodman being led into the courtroom with that sharkskin suit I mentioned at the beginning of the video. We see that his plan worked because Kim is there, and as he derails his deal by telling the truth, we start to understand what he was trying to do. He tells the court that he lied about her involvement in Howard's murder just because he wanted her to be there to hear what he had to say. He started off with the same story he told Marie about being afraid of Walt, but admits that it didn't last long. He saw an opportunity and did everything he could to help Walt build his empire. We know that all of this came from his coping mechanism that he put into place after she left. And there's a moment after Bill hilariously tries to withdraw from the case where he looks back to see that Kim is certainly watching, but he can tell he hasn't quite won her over yet, which at this point is clearly all he's trying to do. He brings up Howard, and by now Saul is gone. He mentions that Kim had the guts to leave town and to start over, but he was the one who ran away. Now that he's really looking at the truth, he moves on to admit that he got Chuck's insurance canceled because he saw a chance to hurt him, and that he'll have to live with the fact that he went on to commit suicide. And while this is all coming from a person who we know would say just about anything if it would help him, the fact that it doesn't here shows us that he's telling the truth. There are some visual clues to enforce it as well. When he mentions Chuck, it cuts to a wide shot where we can see the exit sign a la chicanery and hear the electric hum. And there's a shot of Kim where she's framed like she's in the crosshairs from the railing in the courtroom. It's also in the performance, and in the way he says the name's McGill, I'm James McGill. But where it really counts for him, and for everyone who fell in love with the characters on this show, where it really counts is that Kim believes him. He looks back at her one last time, and when he doesn't see the response right away, he drops his eyes. But when he looks back up, Ray Seahorn does the most subtle bit of facial acting, where she doesn't really do a look, but the tension in her face sort of eases up just enough to where you see that it got through to her. And in case you didn't pick up on that, it's made explicit when he gets called for a meeting with his lawyer. I completely expected this to be Kim through the long drawn out reveal, but thought that it meant that she'd been reinstated and was moving on and practicing law again. In reality, she just used her New Mexico bar card that doesn't have an expiration date, and boy was I glad that she did. And a beautiful callback to the first scene they had together back in season 1, she pulls out a cigarette and they share it up against the wall. Her hands are shaking as she tries to light it, and when he helps her steady them, you see that the flame and then the cherry on the cigarette is in color. It ain't much, but it's theirs, and it's a spark that comes from that thing that they share. You learn that instead of 7 years, he ends up doing 86 for telling the truth. So even though he mentions good behavior, it seems safe to say that he'll never get out of there. This is a fictional prison as far as I can tell, so it's not even clear if she'll come back to visit. This could be the only time they see each other. But again, that's not what's important here. As Kim walks out and fights off tears, she gets one more look at Jimmy in the yard, and it's clear that no matter what happens, it was enough for him to have just one more moment with her. In the closing shot, he gives her the finger guns, and this time it's a sign that Saul's gone. When she turns again before he's out of sight, you know that she knows that he didn't do it to get out of trouble or to win her over, but to set himself free. It ain't much, but given what he's done, it's also kind of everything. So in the end, he didn't get away with it. He didn't even get what Walt or Nacho did, a chance to go out on his own terms. In the first half of this show, I thought the tragedy was that Jimmy, a character who at his core was always looking to be liked by everyone and to be loved ultimately, was looking in a place where he could never get it. His brother Chuck, a complicated character who was broken in different ways to the point of not being able to give it to him. For the way things played out, it was more about him not being able to find himself as all these things were happening. Chuck's death, the ordeal in the desert, Lalo, Howard's death, losing Kim, and the entirety of his time with Walter White. He may have brought most of this on himself, but these things ended up defining him in his not being able to move past them. Each thing sent him further away from the good that was in there, and each made it harder to change. What I really liked about this is that his most self-destructive period came after Kim made the hard but sensible decision to leave after Howard's death. So it's fitting that when he finally comes around, it's after he finds out that she came clean to try to make that right. No one is saving anyone, but the thing that they share, that connection, means enough to get Jimmy to start the process of changing. It smashes Chuck's idea that Jimmy was born that way and that it was pointless for him to try to be something different. It also shows that he's not the same type of character as Walter. With him, I always believed that getting cancer was the thing that allowed him to become what was always under the surface. He was motivated to get respect and fear he thought he deserved and was being denied in his life, and Heisenberg was the realization of that. Jimmy came off as more complicated because after you met him, you started to wonder if the Saul persona you already knew might all just be an act. It turned out to be something else, something more self-destructive, but it wasn't terminal like Walt's cancer. Jimmy under the surface just wanted to be loved, and through his time with Kim learned what that could be. Because that's the thing. None of us have time machines, and as Jimmy found out, none of us can run from our past forever. We can just go forward trying to make better decisions and make the ones that the people we care about would appreciate. Jimmy only earned one smoke and one long last look, but it's worlds better than anything Saul Goodman ever was a part of. I don't think it's a traditionally happy ending, but it could have been a lot worse, especially given how many people die in this universe. For Jimmy, being in jail might not be the end of the world. I think you get a sense of that here. If I could have left one thing out of this, maybe it would be that bus ride chant, which was a little bit much. But either way, you can imagine that he'd be able to handle himself in there. Nothing about what he did would appear to help Kim's situation with Cheryl's civil suit, but I suppose she would feel that it's a just punishment. Also, Jimmy could have really wasted the opportunity if he tried to solve that problem for her. They both paid the price for their mistakes to some extent. They both got there by their own means, and by finally taking some responsibility and looking at the part he played in the pain he carried around, he gets to be Jimmy again. And speaking of Chuck, when Jimmy was doing his thing in court, right after he said his brother was a brilliant lawyer, he added that he was limited. It seemed like a really strange choice of words at the time, but it ties in really wonderfully with the final Ghost of Christmas Past flashback. In that, we see them in what appears to be the time right before season 1 started. Did you ground yourself? It's like music to the ears, and there are about 1,000 references packed into this short interaction, but what stands out the most is that, at least in this case, Chuck is the one that would like Jimmy to stay so they can talk. As isolated as he was, you never got the sense that he was lonely, and I suppose neither did Jimmy. They go back and forth and you see a warmer side of Chuck, even though there's the sense that he might be trying to talk him out of practicing law to balance things out. It doesn't recontextualize their relationship, but it is a reminder that Chuck did care for his brother in that limited way that Jimmy mentioned. It wasn't what he wanted, but there was something there. And it's here that we see the copy of The Time Machine by H.G. Wells that popped up in the season 6 premiere in Saul's mansion, and again in Jimmy's room in episode 2. My initial interpretation was that this meant that this was Jimmy's answer to the time machine question. Maybe he would come back and have this conversation with his brother, rather than rushing off to try to impress him by being something he thought he had no business being. And in the end, it turns out he was pretty good at that. His being leaned back in his chair as he listened to his deal put that on full display. It was glorious, but it wasn't everything. And I think that is a great place to leave things. So let me know in the comments what you thought about the ending of Better Call Saul and how it worked as the ending of the Breaking Bad universe. There's a ton of references and things I had to cut out because there was so much going on that I really wanted to focus on this change that Jimmy was going through. As heavy as it was, it managed to throw in some great laughs. I cracked up when Bill tried to quit the case and when Walt told Saul to stay in his lane. It really is the end, and the callbacks and references really made it feel that way. The impact that common items like the Wayfarer headrest on the airplane, or when Walt takes a second to look at the watch that Jesse gave him for his birthday. I'm gonna miss seeing things like that pop up. And the writing and the acting and everything. I mean, last week was sort of Ray Seahorn's showcase, and this week was all about Bob Odenkirk. Of course, everyone involved did a terrific job, but I have to point out how skillfully he went through this episode, changing from one of the characters to the other that all exist inside this same person. There's just nothing else like it, and I could go on forever, but I won't. I want to thank you all for watching this season with me. You all helped to make it a blast. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.